I used to think that snake plants were impossible to kill until I killed one, or, several.
Turns out low maintenance doesn't mean no maintenance.
So if you've ever wondered why a snake plant looks sad, mushy, or just refuses to grow, I've got you covered, because I've now got a bunch of all different shapes and sizes thriving. So here's what I wish I knew sooner.
I used to think snake plants could live anywhere, and technically they can, just like I can technically survive on instant noodles and an alarming amount of coffee, but is that thriving? Not really, no.
Years ago, I had a snake plant sitting in the corner of my room, a spot I thought had decent light. At first, he seemed fine. Snake plants don't throw tantrums like other houseplants, do they?
No sudden yellow leaves, no dramatic wilting, just quiet suffering.
But then I noticed something weird. The new leaves weren't coming out thick and strong like the older ones. Instead, they were long, wobbly, and flopping over like they'd completely given up on life. Even the colour looked sad. I finally moved him to a brighter window, which included a few hours of direct sun, and within weeks, new growth came in totally different. The leaves were thicker, sturdier, and the colour started to come back. The difference was ridiculous.
This is the thing, we've all been told that snake plants are low light plants, but this isn't really true. I mean, sure, they survive in low light, or rather they just take a long time to die, but they don't thrive.
If you've ever wondered why your snake plant has gone from thick and sturdy from when you bought him to weirdly tall, thin and floppy, then you've probably accidentally put him on a snake plant equivalent of a crash diet. The poor thing is starving for more light, so he's on his tippy toes, stretching himself like some kind of desperate houseplant contortionist, trying to reach for whatever tiny scraps of brightness he can get.
This is called etiolation. It's a sign any little fellow is struggling.
But the stretching isn't the only clue, my plant friend. When I moved into this new gaff a few months ago, I popped this guy here. A pretty dark corner of my living room to say the least. I had a grow light nearby, but none of it was shining over him.
I thought it'd be fine because, it's in his genes and all that, but recently I've started to notice this.
The new leaves are losing the yellow variegation around the edges. This is my plant deciding that fancy colours are a luxury he can't afford right now.
In brighter conditions, these patterns help the plant regulate how much light he absorbs.
But in dim lighting, the little fella is essentially thinking, forget the fancy outfit, I need to photosynthesize as much as possible. So he ditches the variegation in an effort to soak up every last bit of light he can find.
So how much light do these fussy divas actually want?
As much light as you can give them. Snake plants love full sun, a fact that might surprise you. If you really want yours to thrive, stick him right in front of a sunny window.
I know houseplant guides always say bright indirect light as if full sun is some kind of death sentence, but trust me, snake plants absolutely love it.
In their natural habitat, they get blasted with sunshine all day long.
If you've only ever seen snake plants growing indoors, then you might not realise just how big and stunning they get when they have the light they actually want.
Now, there's one thing that kills more snake plants than anything else: watering. I used to pull my hair out trying to figure out how to actually water these damn things, but thankfully after years of experience I think I've cracked it.
The problem is, this plant manages to die from too much water just as much as not enough water. They're the Goldilocks of houseplants, and getting the balance right is the key to keeping them alive.
You might have heard that they never need water and so only water a couple of times a year, and this is unfortunately doing your little guy dirty. So let's make sure we don't overwater him first. Snake plants are succulents, which means they store water in their thick, fleshy leaves. It's like having a built-in emergency supply for dry spells.
But if you keep watering when the plant already has plenty of reserves, those storage cells get overloaded and the leaves start turning into a mushy mess.
Have you ever picked up a leaf and had it squashed between your fingers? That is rot.
The cells inside have basically exploded from taking in more water than they can handle, and once rot sets in, it spreads fast.
I learned this the hard way when I got my first snake plant and noob settings were dialed to 11. I didn't really give much thought to it, so I went about watering once a week without checking the soil. This was a disaster.
Within a month, I went to check in on him and found the base of the leaves looking suspiciously soft. And a few days later, those same leaves were melting off of the soil line.
Snake plants hate sitting in wet soil and they really don't like being watered on a schedule. They want their soil to dry out completely between waterings, but not stay dry forever.
Sure, snake plants can survive drought, but if the soil turns into a rock-hard desert and stays that way for weeks, the leaves start to show it.
Have you ever seen a snake plant's leaves grow sideways? This is a telltale sign of dehydration. You might think, oh no, is he thirsty? I'll give him a quick sip. But that's exactly where people go wrong. If you just pour a tiny trickle of water onto bone-dry soil, most of it won't even reach the roots. It'll just run down the sides of the pot and right out of the bottom. Meanwhile, your snake plant is sitting there thinking, that's it, that's all I get.
Instead of actually rehydrating, the leaves continue to sag, and you're left wondering why it's still looking sad even though you just watered him.
Let me take you briefly to West Africa, in your head that is. Snake plants grow in dry, rocky soils where rain is rare but heavy when it does come.
That means their roots are used to go long periods without rain, but then getting a proper soaking all at once. They aren't sipping on moisture every few days, they're chugging when it finally rains, then drying out again.
That's exactly how we should be watering them indoors, infrequently but deeply. And this is where drainage is everything. I always use a fast draining soil mix and make sure the pot has drainage holes.
So in my newbie days, I used to spy on my neighbour's big old snake plant at the window and think to myself, gosh, those plants sure do get big. I best stick mine into a big pot so that you can size up quick.
Unfortunately for me though, this didn't really work out so well. Not only would they not grow, but this is actually one of the quickest and easiest ways to mess them up.
I've now realised that when you stick a snake plant in a pot that's way bigger than he needs, there's more soil than there are roots.
And what does all that extra soil do? Well, it holds on to water. And what happens when snake plant roots sit in wet soil for too long? Yeah, rot. See, snake plants don't have massive root systems. They're actually pretty compact compared to how big the leaves get.
If you throw one into a pot that's way too big, then the roots are just sitting there struggling to keep up while all the excess soil stays damp for ages.
You might not even think you're overwatering, but the plant is basically stuck in a swamp with no escape. I learned this the hard way when I repotted a snake plant into a much bigger pot, thinking I was doing him a favour. Weeks went by, and instead of growing, it just sat there looking deeply unimpressed. Then I poked at the soil and realised his private parts were still wet, even though I hadn't watered in ages.
I had to pull him out, chop off all the rotted roots and downsize the pot, basically undoing all my hard work.
So what size pot should you actually use? The general rule is only go up one size at a time, but in truth you're fine to go a couple of sizes bigger. Just don't go from this to something like this. If the roots are tightly packed and circling the bottom, just move up a little.
Snake plants don't actually mind being slightly root bound. They tend to push out new growth faster when they feel slightly snug, so don't rush to repot.
Now, after all that talk about snake plants hating too much water, you might be thinking, hang on a sec, if they hate sitting in soggy soil, why have you got 2 videos about them growing in water on your channel? Ah yes, this is something that really did used to confuse the bejesus out of me, but after a bit of experimentation it all made sense to me. Overwatering and a plant living in water are not the same thing.
The problem with overwatering is that the plant is forced to live in soggy soil for weeks or months on end. It's not really the water in the soggy soil that's doing the damage, but rather the lack of oxygen.
Roots need to breathe just as much as you and me, and wet soil just sucks out the air like a vacuum. When a plant is living in just water, there is plenty of oxygen around the roots. I actually put this to the test again recently and moved 2 of my snake plants into leca, which are just little balls of hardened clay, and sat in a reservoir of water in a pot. Well, so far neither of them have died, which I'm counting as a win. In fact, they both seem to be thriving. Look who's coming out to say hello at the bottom of the pot.
So why would you even bother with semi-hydro? Well, I'm not really a semi-hydro preacher or anything. I've just been experimenting recently and there are a few things I like about it.
For one, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of watering. No more poking the soil and wondering if it's too dry or not dry enough. With leca, the plant just drinks when it needs to. Plus, it helps prevent overwatering since the roots are never sat in soggy soil. There's always airflow around them. If you're a chronic underwaterer, a self-watering setup with leca means your plant won't be left high and dry just because you forgot about him for a bit.
And the best bit? No gnats.
Have you ever bought a snake plant and thought, why does this look so lonely? Well, you're not alone. A single snake plant can look a bit sparse, can't it? Especially when he's young.
But here's a trick. Instead of waiting for him to fill out, you can cheat the system by combining multiple plants into one pot for an instantly fuller look.
I did this last year with 3 smaller snake plants, and now the pot is bursting with growth. It's practically trying to climb out, which is exactly the kind of problem I love to have. Now, if you're going to do this, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, pot size still matters. You don't want to go too big just because you're combining plants. Remember, extra soil equals extra moisture, which equals root rot waiting to happen.
The goal is to give them just enough space to grow without drowning them.
Second, watering is even more important in a packed pot. With more roots competing for water, they'll dry the soil out faster, which means you'll need to check in on them a little more often. But still no tiny trickles, eh? And finally, light is key if you want that full, lush look to last. If your snake plants are packed in together but only getting a little bit of light, they'll start stretching out, getting floppy and losing that nice upright shape.
Now, did you know about the power of cinnamon and all the incredible uses for houseplants? That's just one of 10 nifty plant care tips that I share in this video here. So make sure you watch it next and I'll see you there.